Get those solar panels installed at your home or residence by going to onesolarsolution.com. Bringing you the world news coming up next. This is Radio Caravan, the world news read by Shabnam Modgil. Laura is an even stronger storm now compared to yesterday, with winds gusting at 110 miles per hour as a Category 3 major hurricane. It is expected to intensify to Category 4 with winds of 130 miles per hour later today. Landfall is still expected on the Louisiana and Texas borderline. Additionally, a storm surge of up to 15 feet is forecast from western Louisiana to eastern Texas. Residents in Galveston and Port Arthur in Texas ordered to evacuate as Hurricane Laura strengthened in the Gulf of Mexico last night en route to its expected landfall late tonight. The second night of the Republican National Convention appeared to be largely targeted at blue-collar workers whose votes, especially in swing states, are critical to President Trump's re-election prospects. The primetime lineup featured a diverse mix of Trump supporters, extolling what they say and they saw as president's accomplishments in his first term, signaling criminal justice reform, creating jobs, and by large adhering to the night's hopeful theme, America, Land of Opportunity. Melania Trump expressed sympathy to the Americans who have lost loved ones to the coronavirus pandemic, acknowledging the grim toll of a public health crisis the president has failed to contain during a keynote address on the second night of the Republican convention. Speaking from the White House Rose Garden yesterday, the First Lady offered her condolences to the loved ones of more than 178,000 Americans who have now died from the virus and the millions more who have been infected, casting her husband as the nation's best hope to move past this grave chapter. First Lady Melania Trump delivered one of the longest and most personal speeches of her career last night, using her keynote address to strike a personal note and deviate from the Republican National Convention's more partisan attacks. And among other things, she spoke freely about her immigration from Slovenia, a small country that split from Yugoslavia in the early 1990s. At a time when Donald Trump is looking to get re-elected for a second term as U.S. president, a new book threatens to add a roadblock in the way. The book has been written by First Lady Melania Trump's friend and staffer, titled Melania and Me, The Rise and Fall of My Friendship with the First Lady. And among the explosive claims made by the author in the memoir, the negative comments made by the First Lady against Trump and his adult children. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on the second night of the Republican convention gave a speech from Jerusalem that was a symbolic nod to white conservative Christians in the United States. In a pre-taped address filmed with the old city of Jerusalem in the background, he claimed that President Trump has made Americans safer. Casting aside his own advice to American diplomats and bulldozing a long tradition of Secretary of State non-partisanship, he plunged into the heart of the presidential race with a speech supporting Donald Trump's re-election. Yesterday's convention sparked uproar on social media from some politicians and commentators for including a naturalization ceremony in the White House featuring a government official who may be illegally occupying his position at a political campaign event, and also at a time when U.S. immigration has been delayed by the Trump administration amid the pandemic. Immigrants from 5 countries, India, Bolivia, Lebanon, Sudan and Ghana, stood in a line during the ceremony in the White House. And Vice President Mike Pence will deliver the marquee speech tonight at the Republican convention, making the case for another 4 years for President Trump and laying the foundation for his own potential White House run in 2024. He takes center stage at the convention today to make the case that his boss will bring the U.S. economy back to its pre-pandemic heights if given 4 more years in office. Joe Biden's campaign said the second night of the Republican convention was an attempt to create an alternate reality to cover up for President Trump's failures. 3 months after the killing of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police, a city in Wisconsin has become the newest site echoing chants of Black Lives Matter. People took to the streets demanding justice after one footage went viral of police shooting Jacob Blake in the back while his children were present and watching from the inside of a vehicle. 2 people were killed and 1 was injured as shots rang out during these protests in Kenosha, Wisconsin, just before midnight yesterday. And the United States is set to execute Lesmond Mitchell, a convicted murderer and the only Native American on federal death row, today, despite opposition from the Navajo Nation, which says the government is infringing tribal sovereignty. And the body of a missing soldier is believed to have been found about 30 miles from Fort Hood, the Army base in Texas, where he was stationed. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will hold closed-door meetings today with Bahrain's royal family and top officials in the United Arab Emirates amid the Trump administration's push for Arab nations to recognize Israel. Sudan said it cannot establish diplomatic relations with Israel for now, dashing U.S. hopes for a speedy breakthrough during a visit by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Sudan's economic woes, which fueled the overthrow of veteran strongman Omar al-Bashir last year, are driving a wedge between military and civilians, members of the transitional government that replaced him. Israeli aircraft struck posts belonging to the Lebanese group Hezbollah early this morning after shots were fired from Lebanon towards its troops. And Israel has unveiled detailed images taken there by a new reconnaissance satellite over the Roman ruins of Palmyra in neighboring Syria. Fighting resumed in southern Yemen between Emirati-backed separatists and the internationally recognized government. The renewed violence comes after the separatists suspended participation in talks to implement a Saudi-brokered peace deal. Turkey's new coronavirus cases have jumped to their highest level since mid-June at 1,502, and Turkey said it is ready for talks with Greece without preconditions about an escalating row over eastern Mediterranean gas that saw the two uneasy NATO allies stage rival military exercises. Another group of children with medical needs who have been living in migrant camps in Greece has arrived in Germany today with their close relatives, a transfer that was delayed by coronavirus cases in two families. And authorities in Berlin banned several protests planned for the weekend against coronavirus pandemic measures. The protests have drawn support from the German far right. Police in Belarus detained over 50 people across the country during protests demanding the resignation of Belarus's authoritarian leader. The renewed crackdown on protesters who have been taking to the streets for over 2 weeks comes as authorities crank up pressure on the opposition, jailing several activists, summoning others for questioning and selectively ordering dozens of demonstrators to appear in court. Two survivors of the New Zealand mosque massacre abandoned prepared statements to vent their anger directly at gunman Brenton Tarrant in a Christchurch court, drawing applause from fellow victims as they called him a terrorist who deserved to die. On a day when the poetic words of love from a daughter to her murdered father brought many people to tears in a New Zealand courtroom, the white supremacist who killed him and 50 other worshippers at two mosques said he wouldn't speak before he was sentenced. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the World News on Radio Caravan. Hundreds of flights were cancelled in South Korea while North Korea's leader expressed concern about a potential loss of lives and crops as the country braces for a fast-approaching typhoon forecast as one of the strongest to hit their peninsula this year. Facing a maximum wind speed of 162 kilometers per hour, Typhoon Bavi already lashing South Korea's southern resort island of Jeju today, flooding roads, toppling trees, ripping off signboards and knocking down at least one traffic sign as it passed over waters of the island's western shores. Myanmar expanded a lockdown in conflict-racked Rakhine state to cover 4 more townships, halting the movement of about 1 million people as the number of coronavirus cases climbed steadily. China said it remains firm in its insistence that Canada make the first move to end the detention of 2 Canadians following a meeting of the 2 countries' foreign ministers. And a Canadian court has blocked Huawei Chief Financial Officer Meng Wanzhou's request for the release of more documents related to her arrest in 2018. China's foreign minister kicked off a tour of Europe, still reeling from coronavirus, as he seeks to shore up economic and diplomatic relations in light of tensions with the United States. China is protesting the alleged incursion of a U.S. Air Force U-2 spy plane into a no-fly zone imposed during live-fire military exercises in the country's north. And numerous Chinese and U.S. military exercises, Taiwan missiles tracking Chinese fighters and plummeting China-U.S. ties make for a heady cocktail of tension that is raising fears of conflict touched off by a crisis over Taiwan. And even as India and China are involved in a tense standoff at the line of actual control in Ladakh, with the PLA refusing to disengage from the Finger area, Chinese ambassador to India made an outreach to India when he was speaking at the India-China Youth Webinar and said that India is a partner and not a rival for Beijing. India's national security planners are pushing hard to complete an all-weather strategic route to Ladakh. Sri Lanka wants to pursue a neutral foreign policy but will retain an India-first approach in strategic and security matters. And in a significant development related to the COVID-19 vaccine, Russia has expressed its willingness to the Indian government for collaboration in the manufacture of Sputnik vaccine. It is pertinent to note that Russia claims to have developed the first COVID-19 vaccine, Sputnik, a human adenoviral vector vaccine that fights against coronavirus disease. India's COVID-19 tally crossed the 32 lakh mark with 67,151 new cases and 1,059 deaths in the last 24 hours. Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal said the state government will double the testing for COVID-19 infections, and the death toll in the building collapse incident in Maharashtra's Raigad district mounted to 16 today. After the Enforcement Directorate and the CBI, the Narcotics Control Bureau will also join the investigation into the death of Bollywood actor Sushant Singh Rajput. And Sabah Seher, one of Afghanistan's first female film directors, has been shot in the capital of Kabul. The 44-year-old was taken to the hospital, but the extent of her injuries not immediately clear. Her husband said she was traveling for work when 3 gunmen opened fire on her car. A Taliban-claimed suicide attack has killed at least 3 people in northern Afghanistan as neighboring Pakistan pushed for delayed peace talks to begin. Pakistan's foreign minister urging senior Taliban leaders to start the delayed peace talks with Kabul. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all that I have in the news for you this morning.